The salvage ship Distant Echo drifted through the debris field of what had once been a thriving space station. Tiv, the ship's Zentharai engineer, monitored the scanner arrays with practiced efficiency, his 4 eyes tracking multiple data streams simultaneously. The Zenthari were known throughout the galaxy for their methodical nature, their calm logic, and their absolute adherence to protocol. Tiv embodied all of these qualities perfectly, which was why the human confused him so thoroughly. Ilara had joined the crew 3 months ago, recommended by Captain Voresh despite Tiv's protests. Humans were unpredictable, he'd argued. They operated on emotion, rather than logic. They formed attachments to the most illogical things. The captain had overruled him, citing the humans' reputation for creative problem-solving and their uncanny ability to survive impossible situations. Tiv had not been impressed, until today. Tiv, I'm picking up a biosignature in Sector 7. Ilara's voice crackled through his comm unit. It's faint, but it's definitely there. Impossible, Tiv responded, his mandibles clicking in doubt. The station has been abandoned for 6 cycles. Atmospheric processors failed. Nothing could survive. Well, something did. I'm going in. Tiv's primary eyes widened in alarm. Negative. Protocol requires. Protocol can wait. If something's alive in there, it won't be for long. Ilara out. The comm went silent. Tiv released a hissing sigh that his translator failed to capture properly. This was exactly what he meant about humans. They ignored procedure, trusted their instincts over data, and somehow infuriatingly were often right. 47 minutes later, Ilara cycled through the airlock, her environmental suit frost-covered and her oxygen reserves critically low. Tiv was waiting, a full diagnostic suite ready to catalog her inevitable injuries and the 17 regulations she'd violated. You are 23 minutes past your allotted EVA time, he began, pulling up his datapad. You ignored 3 recall signals. You entered a structurally compromised zone without backup. The captain will, Tiv. Ilara held up one gloved hand, breathing heavily. Just give me a second. She unsealed her helmet, revealing a face flushed with exertion and something else, an expression Tiv had learned to recognize over the past months. Humans wore it when they had done something they considered significant, something emotional. They called it being proud. Quote, Ilara carefully lowered her bulky backpack standard issue for salvage operations, capable of holding approximately 43 kilograms of recovered materials. She set it down with unusual gentleness, then slowly opened the top flap. Tiv stepped closer, his curiosity overriding his annoyance. His mandibles went slack. A small, furry creature lifted its head from inside the backpack, blinking enormous dark eyes at the light. It was covered in silvery blue fur, with rounded ears and tiny paws that flexed tentatively. The creature made a soft, chirping sound. That is a Kelrathi cub, Tiv whispered, his voice subroutine struggling to process the appropriate tone. An infant Kelrathi. Yeah, Ilara said softly, reaching down to stroke the cub's head with one finger. It leaned into her touch, chirping again. Found her in what used to be the environmental research lab. She was in a stasis pod, must have been someone's research subject. The pod's power cell was almost dead. Another few hours, and she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Tiv's 4 eyes studied the cub, his analytical mind cataloging details rapidly. Kelrathi were an endangered species, their homeworld devastated by a solar flare decades ago. Fewer than 3,000 remained in the galaxy, scattered across various conservation programs. This cub was worth more than the entire salvage haul they'd collected this quarter. It was also, technically, the property of whoever had owned the research station. The legal complications of this discovery are substantial, Tiv said, though his voice lacked its usual firmness. The paperwork alone will require. She was in a research lab, Tiv. Not a conservation center. Someone was experimenting on her. Ilara's voice had gone cold, and Tiv recognized that tone too. It was the sound of a human who had decided something was morally wrong and would not be persuaded otherwise by logic, law, or reason. "We must report this to the authorities," Tiv tried. "We will. After we get her somewhere safe. After we make sure she's healthy. After we find out who left her here to die." Ilara lifted the backpack carefully, cradling it against her chest. The cub peeked out, making soft sounds that Tiv's translator interpreted as contentment. Tiv watched as Ilara carried the backpack toward the crew quarters, murmuring softly to the creature inside. His logical mind computed the problems this would cause. The legal inquiries, the delays to their salvage schedule, the additional resources required for the cub's care. But he also remembered the statistics on Kelrathi population decline. He thought about the research labs that operated in abandoned stations, far from oversight. He considered what would have happened if Ilara hadn't ignored protocol, hadn't trusted her instincts, hadn't gone into that compromised sector. "Ilara," he called out. She turned, the backpack still cradled protectively. "The cub will require specialized nutrition. I will modify our food synthesizers. And we should establish a quarantine protocol to ensure it carries no contaminants from the station." A smile spread across Ilara's face, that peculiar human expression that conveyed warmth and gratitude simultaneously. "Thanks, Tiv. This is merely logical," he responded, his mandibles clicking in what might have been the Zenthari equivalent of a smile. "We must ensure proper documentation of our salvage, even if that salvage happens to be alive." Number 5. As Ilara disappeared down the corridor, Tiv returned to his station. He pulled up the communication logs and began drafting a report, one that would, perhaps, take slightly longer to complete than strictly necessary. Long enough to ensure the cub was healthy. Long enough to find the right authorities, ones who cared about conservation rather than profit. He would never admit it aloud, but sometimes, just sometimes, the human way had merit. Protocol was important, but perhaps knowing when to ignore it was equally so. From somewhere down the corridor, he heard Ilara's voice, singing something in the peculiar human custom of lullabies. The cub's chirping had quieted, replaced by what sounded like purring. Tiv's 4 eyes returned to his screens, but his mind wandered. Humans, he reflected, were indeed unpredictable. They ignored logic, trusted emotion, and formed attachments to creatures they'd met only moments before. And sometimes, illogically, impossibly, that made all the difference. The salvage could wait. Some discoveries, he was learning, were worth more than their weight in credits.